Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Okay, good. Well, Marlene did send me your bio and everything, so I'll
Great.
just kind of kick things off, read your bio, and then from my understanding, Ellen's coming later, and then you're going to introduce her.
Yes. Yep,
Okay, perfect.
that's correct. Awesome. Thank you.
Do you want to practice, make sure you can share your screen?
I was just pulling that up. Yeah, I do. I don't
Perfect.
want to get
Yep, looks
that.
great.
Okay, perfect. And then just make sure I can advance here. Great.
Yep, looks good on my end.
Perfect.
So we have a little bit of time before we get started. But I will start us right at 125.
Okay.
And this topic is really new to me, so I'll be listening on and try to come up. Marlene gave me a few questions. If we don't get a ton of questions from the audience, I will be working on some in my head. But yeah, I'm really new to this topic, so I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot.
No problem. That's good. We hope that many people who are new to the topic join.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true. All right. Well, I'm going to turn my camera off until 125, and then I'll pop back on.
Okay, that sounds
And
good.
is
I'll
Ellen
turn my
on
camera.
yet?
I'm sorry?
Is Ellen in the conference yet?
No, not yet. She actually had another commitment, so she's going to have to jump in later.
Okay. Sounds good.
Great.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is 1:25, so I will go ahead and get started. I'm Julita Stoltz. I'm the DBE Program Manager for ODOT and the chairperson for the Cincinnati Minority Business Assistance Center Advisory Board. I just want to start by saying welcome to our last group of sessions for the day. This has been such a tremendous conference so far, and I'm really excited to be a part of this session. It's another interesting topic that we've never been able to have at a previous We Mean Business conference. This session is titled Introduction to Co-ops, and we're happy to have subject matter expert Hannah Scott with us today. Hannah is the program manager of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences Center for Cooperatives at Ohio State, where she leads the creation and implementation of programs and assistance to foster cooperatives and rural business in Ohio, West Virginia, and beyond. Hannah is passionate about cooperative opportunities in agriculture and rural communities, having worked with a variety of agricultural producers who have established co-op enterprises and leading the Ohio and West Virginia Food Hub Network and the Appalachia Cooperatives Initiative. She completed the Certified Business Advisor Certificate Program through Kent State University and the Ohio Small Business Development Centers. Hannah's family operates a cattle, row crop, forage, and hop farm in southern Ohio, where she still helps as she's able. She's also active in her local agricultural community. If you have questions as Hannah talks, please put them in the chat, and we'll go through those as she goes through her presentation. And later, she'll have a co-speaker join us as she's able, Ellen, and we'll introduce her when she's here. With that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation. If at any point you can't hear me or anything happens with the screen, please let me know. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm of course with the Center for Cooperatives and the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences at Ohio State. And really our mission is to extend knowledge and technical assistance to emerging and existing cooperatives, and to do that through kind of our traditional areas of teaching, applied research, and outreach education or extension work. So I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm actually located at the OSU South Centers in Piketon, Ohio. You may be familiar with the OSU South Centers, and if not, we encourage you to get familiar with the OSU South Centers. We have a lot of great work going on. I, of course, am working in the business development area with the Center for Cooperatives, but we also have work in horticulture. For example, one of my colleagues, I think Brad Bergerford, was also on the conference earlier this week. We have work in soil, water, and bioenergy, and we have work happening in aquaculture as well. So if you are interested in any of those areas or want to learn more about the resources that are available from the OSU South Centers, which is located again in Southern Ohio, please visit southcenters.osu.edu to learn more. And just as my obligatory disclaimer, this is an educational session, and it's not meant as any type of advice. If you need advice from a professional, we encourage you to seek that advice. So I just wanted to start out by talking with the group a little bit as much as we can in this virtual format about what your experience with cooperatives has been, or maybe what you're hoping to learn from today's conversation around cooperatives. And I really encourage you to ask questions and let me know if there's spaces in this conversation that you want to learn more about, or things that you're really interested in, want to learn more about. So I would love to hear in the chat, if you're willing to share that, whether you're a member of a cooperative or you know of examples of cooperatives working in your communities, or if there's anything specific that you want to learn about cooperatives. So I will monitor the chat there, and I think my moderator will help me monitor that chat if you have anything to share. but feel free to share throughout and ask questions throughout if that would be helpful. So let's get started by thinking about, actually, I wanted to do this a little bit differently and to share with you some examples of cooperatives that are working in rural communities all across the country. And one thing that hopefully you'll see from today's conversation is that cooperatives are diverse and they're embedded in communities in many ways across the United States, including in urban and rural communities. So some examples of this, just to showcase that diversity and to showcase that embeddedness, on the upper left of the screen, you can see a shopping cart. That's my way of representing that in many communities like my own. I actually live in a small town in Southern Ohio. There are independently owned hardware stores that actually, as a group, cooperatively own hardware wholesalers that supply their stores. So for example, Ace Hardware and Do It Best are actually wholesale cooperative supply cooperatives. They supply things like lumber and hardware to those independently owned stores so that those independently owned stores can get those products more efficiently and effectively. There are also purchasing cooperatives for wholesale supply purchasing for restaurants, for example, like fast food franchises all across the country that help those franchisees actually get products, get inputs that they need more efficiently. You can also see on the screen here some utility lines. Many businesses and homes and schools in the United States actually get their electricity. Some of them get their water. Some of them get their telecommunications. So for example, broadband or telephone services from community-owned cooperatives. So those customers who are getting electricity from the cooperative are actually the owners of the business. And there are over 800 of those rural electric cooperatives that serve actually over 20 million users, and they power over 56% of the US land mass, according to the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. So these co-ops are probably in rural communities that you're aware of and doing work, the important work of getting infrastructure and utilities to those communities. Also, farmer-owned cooperatives provide important services. They do things like marketing. They help with purchasing production inputs. They might provide needed services to farmers all across the United States. Of course, many of those working and operating in rural communities. So for example, here in Ohio, a Heritage Cooperative is actually a grain marketing cooperative. They also have, they're a crop input supplier, they're an energy provider, they're a feed seller, and they operate country stores for sales of consumer products. They actually have about 5,000 member owners. You probably also encounter a number of farmer-owned cooperatives in the grocery store, maybe without even knowing that they're farmer-owned cooperatives. So for example, Organic Valley is a pretty well-known organic brand, mostly known for their dairy products, but they also have a number of other product lines. That's actually a farmer-owned cooperative. Land O'Lakes, most well-known for butter, they are a farmer-owned cooperative. So they're actually owned by dairy farmers as well as other cooperatives that purchase inputs from them. Welch's, the grape juice folks, they make a number of other products besides just grape juice, but they're actually farmer-owned by those farmers who produce grapes. Sunkist is actually a citrus growers cooperative. Florida's Natural, that's an orange juice brand, is actually owned by a cooperative of citrus growers. Blue Diamond, you might know them for almond snacks and almonds. That's actually a cooperative that's owned by almond growers, mostly located in the Western United States. And there's many, many more. But those are just examples of farmer-owned cooperatives that are working to help farmers more effectively market their products, sometimes add value to those products, perhaps purchase the needed inputs that they need to produce those products, and to get services that would help them be more effective. Another really important area of the cooperative community is financial services cooperatives. So you may have heard of credit unions. Credit unions are a form of cooperative enterprise. They're actually owned by the customers who use their services. So for example, Atomic Credit Union is actually located right across the street from my office. It's a co-op. I get reminded of co-ops every morning when I drive by there. It has actually 14 locations throughout Southern and Southeast Ohio, again, owned by the community members who utilize the services. In the middle of the bottom pictures, you can see a restaurant and bakery. That represents worker-owned cooperatives that are actually owned and democratically controlled by their workers. And we're going to talk quite a bit more about this when Ellen joins us a little bit later. So worker cooperatives have been around for a number of years, but this is a space that is growing. One of the older worker cooperatives in Ohio is actually Casa Nueva. Anybody who's familiar with Athens or maybe an Ohio University alum has probably heard of Casa Nueva. It's located in Uptown Athens. It's a restaurant and cantina, and they've been a worker-owned cooperative since 1985. They actually started with 8 recently unemployed restaurant workers. They have a really interesting backstory. Today, they're a diverse business employing many, many people, including worker owners. There's other worker-owned cooperatives in the Appalachian region. Those are cooperatives doing things like running restaurants, running coffee shops, bookstores, music stores, bakeries, and many more. And then also, food and grocery cooperatives are another model of cooperatives that are working in rural communities as well as urban communities. So for example, Local Roots is actually a retail food store and cafe in Worcester, Ohio. They actually sell produce and dairy products and all kinds of food products, often from local and regional farmers and food producers. They operate a cafe, as I mentioned, and they also operate a shared use commercial kitchen. That enterprise is actually owned by community members. So the folks who might be shopping at the cooperative or at the store. And they're also owned as well by farmers. So they're owned by 2 different groups of stakeholders. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But really what I wanted to do to kick off here is to just highlight the diversity of the cooperative model and to share some working examples of cooperatives that are making an impact in their community. And as we go on, we'll talk about what exactly it means to be a cooperative. Again, I'm happy to answer questions as we go. So this just summarizes that cooperatives can be owned by many different groups of people. So those cooperatives that I just talked about, they might be producer-owned cooperatives. So these are cooperatives of people like farmers or makers and artisans, for example. They might be performing functions like marketing and processing and distribution. So for example, about a decade ago, there were an estimated 300 arts and crafts cooperatives with about 16,000 members across the United States. They were doing things like marketing the art on behalf of those members, obtaining supplies, oftentimes obtaining space for those artists to either work or perhaps display their work, and more. Also, consumer cooperatives are owned, as the name implies, by the folks who purchase from those cooperatives. So for example, grocery stores and credit unions and rural electric cooperatives are all examples of consumer-owned cooperatives. Purchasing and shared service cooperatives are those that help their users, typically buyers of some product or service, do so more efficiently. So for example, sometimes we see hospitals, for example, cooperating to get services that they all utilize more efficiently. So for example, commercial laundry services, where hospitals could come together in a cooperative structure to operate services like a commercial laundry in a much more efficient way than doing it on their own, and reducing the redundancy of all having to do that on their own. We also see co-ops in social and public service. So, for example, housing cooperatives are a really big area in social and public service where those living together in a cooperatively structured housing complex actually are the member owners of that enterprise, of that property typically. We also see cooperatively organized schools, for example, healthcare cooperatives, and more. And then I shared Casa Nueva as an example of worker cooperatives, and we'll talk much more about worker cooperatives. And then multi-stakeholder cooperatives really are cooperatives that bring together different groups of stakeholders all into the same enterprise. So that might be, for example, an enterprise that is owned by both farmers and consumers. For example, some grocery stores are structured that way, or perhaps it might be a restaurant that's owned by community members and worker owners. And we'll talk more about that. So I'd also like to highlight that cooperatives operate across sectors. So you've heard me talk about housing, you've heard me talk about agriculture and healthcare and food and financial services and childcare. There's also cooperatives in transportation. Really, this is a diverse space. So as we're talking about the cooperative form, just keep in mind that there are many unique applications of that form. I had a colleague who used to say that if you've seen one co-op, you've seen one co-op. So that's something that keeps this space also really interesting. There are many cooperatives across the United States. The University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives did some applied research a couple of years ago to estimate how many co-ops there are in the US. They estimated about 64,000 with many employees, just over 850,000, I think is what that, 852,000 employees. And of course, we see cooperatives with geographic diversity as well. So there are cooperatives clustered in specific areas across the United States. For example, in the upper Midwest is one area where we see a number of cooperatives, as well as in the Northeast. And sometimes specific types of cooperatives are also clustered in different regions. So let's talk about, okay, we've seen that there are many cooperatives operating across the United States, that they're diverse, they're operating across sectors. But what are we talking about when we say that they're cooperatives? What actually makes all of these businesses that seem so diverse similar? Well, it's their manner of operating. So there's two definitions here on your screen of what a cooperative is. The first one is from the International Cooperative Alliance, which is a global organization that does cooperative education and advocacy and research on all different types of cooperatives. They define cooperatives as autonomous associations of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. And we'll actually parse that definition out in just a few seconds. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a unit within their Rural Development Agency that provides services to businesses as well as cooperatives. And they actually define cooperatives as a form of business owned and controlled by the people who use its services. So you can kind of see three components in that definition. There's user ownership, user control, and user benefit. And really, cooperatives are kind of defined by who their users are. So you can see it in the examples that I talked about earlier. There are farmer users, there are worker users, there are perhaps other producer type users like artists and consumers. So really it's about that user ownership, user control, and user benefit. Cooperatives are a business structure. So we'll talk about how cooperatives compare to other types of businesses. They're also a set of values and principles. And the values and principles operate kind of permeate the way that cooperatives do business. And This set of principles is actually globally recognized and traces its roots back to some of the first forms of modern cooperative businesses. This set of globally recognized principles is put out by the International Cooperative Alliance. There's actually another set of principles that actually expands on this for worker cooperatives. And as we talk with Ellen, we might hear a little bit more about this. But there's quite a few similarities as well. So these principles, we'll talk about each one in turn and then talk a little bit more about how that impacts how a cooperative actually operates, how the business functions. The first principle is voluntary and open membership. So joining a cooperative is voluntary. And cooperatives, historically, I mentioned, for example, the first kind of modern cooperative that where we can trace these principles to was actually formed in the mid 1840s in England. And it was a consumer cooperative or a cooperative of workers coming together to purchase products. And at that time, they actually allowed members without regard to religion or gender. They actually allowed all members to vote. And in particular, they allowed women to vote in their cooperative, which was pretty progressive and innovative for that time. So cooperatives continue to operate by this open membership principle. Now, there are some cooperatives, for example, that membership depends on whether you can use the services of the cooperative. For example, worker cooperatives are owned by the workers who may work at an enterprise. If I don't work at that enterprise, I'm not going to be eligible for membership in that cooperative. Number 2 is democratic member control. This, I would argue, is one of the most important, maybe the most important principle of cooperatives. So cooperatives are they are owned and controlled by the people who use their services, as I mentioned. And they actually operate that ownership and control. Those people who are member owners of the cooperative do so in a democratic structure. So often this is through what's called a one member, one vote principle. So the members of a cooperative all have one vote in the cooperative's affairs. So for example, when they go to elect the directors of a cooperative, each member has one vote. And that's regardless of how much equity invested in the cooperative a member might have. For example, how much money they contribute to the cooperative. That's regardless of how much business they do with the cooperative. It's regardless, for example, in a worker cooperative of their position within the cooperative. That one member, one vote principle actually ensures that cooperatives are controlled democratically by all of their members. Now, some cooperatives might use a different democratic structure, but they do generally use democratic structures, and most often that one member, one vote principle. Number 3 is member economic participation. This refers to the fact that, so I have sometimes been talking about the member owners of a cooperative as members, as owners, as users. Number 3 refers to the fact that the members of a cooperative are actually the owners of the business enterprise. So they have all of the rights and responsibilities of owners, which includes, for example, helping to finance the cooperative, helping to capitalize the cooperative. So those owners are actually equity holders in the business. So they may contribute that equity up front as the cooperative gets started, and likely that's often how that happens. But they also might contribute that equity over time, and that also often happens. Autonomy and independence refers to the fact that cooperatives are controlled by their members, often through a board of directors, and that when they are out working, for example, with other businesses, or maybe they have relationships, transactional relationships, or even ownership relationships in other business, they still retain their autonomy. They are still locally controlled and owned. Number 5 is education, training, and information. Cooperatives, as democratically and jointly controlled enterprises, have an interest in helping ensure that their members are doing the best that they can. For example, in a farmer-owned cooperative, perhaps that's marketing produce or fruit, maybe dairy on behalf of its members, has an interest in ensuring that those products that those members are producing are high quality. So they might do education and training to help their members produce higher quality products. Number 6 is cooperation among cooperatives. So the more you learn about cooperatives, the more you learn that this is a network, that cooperatives really are connected in many ways, both through their values, but often through examples of cooperating. So you might see cooperatives, for example, in the rural electric space, coming together, recognizing needs that they all have, and then cooperating to fulfill those needs, for example, by forming purchasing cooperatives to get the supplies that they need, or going together to form joint associations that provide training, for example, and workforce development. And then finally, number 7 is concern for community. Cooperatives are rooted in their communities. They're owned by their members who live and work in their communities. And so we often see cooperatives engaging in activities that are for the benefit of their communities because of that interest in continuing and keeping the community strong. So cooperatives are made up of members. The members are the owners of the cooperative. Cooperatives are governed by an elected board of directors. That board of directors is elected both from and by the membership of the cooperative. So directors are both members of the cooperative, and as they are serving, they're directors of the cooperative. Depending on the cooperative, you might see boards of directors of 5 or 8 or 7 or 9, 12 directors, even as large as in some worker cooperatives, for example, all of the worker members serve on the board of directors. I've actually visited a worker cooperative where there were over 50 members and all of them served on the board of directors. In some cooperatives, generally, there's also employees and or management teams. So those are the folks who are carrying out the day-to-day functions of the cooperative, making it operate. So for example, those cooperatives that are providing utility services take lots of employees to actually provide those services, to make sure that the electric lines get run and that they're working properly, to make sure that customers can get their bills and pay their bills and keep everything functioning. So management and employees play an important function in cooperatives as well. This chart just shows how cooperatives compare to other business enterprises. You can see cooperatives all the way on the right compared to other common forms of business enterprises in the United States, on some important concepts in business ownership. So you can see that, again, cooperatives are owned by their user members. And in other forms of business, that connection between ownership and use is not so prevalent. It's not one of the hallmarks. And where in cooperatives, that user component is connected to the ownership component. So for example, in a farmer marketing cooperative, the folks who are marketing products through the cooperative are the users, and they are the member owners of the cooperative. In a worker cooperative, the folks contributing their labor to the cooperative are the users. They're the folks who are the member owners. The purpose of a cooperative business is really to meet members' needs. Cooperatives are structured a little bit differently when we start looking at the financial concepts. And in some ways, the returns on investment to members are limited, or can be limited. And so the reason that cooperatives are organized and continue functioning or continue moving forward is to meet members' needs. In other business structures, we might see, of course, that there are many reasons for starting a business, whether that's to provide employment, whether it's to provide employment for other people in the community. Often we see a return on investment as a motivation in other business enterprises. Whereas in cooperatives, that return on investment, particularly for non-member owners, is somewhat limited. In membership requirements, again, we talked about that voluntary and open membership requirement. To become a member of a cooperative, generally there is some specific process. We'll talk more about that with Ellen in the context of worker cooperatives, but it's usually established. Those eligibility requirements and how to become a member are established by the cooperative.
There is one question in the chat. Teresa asked, what business best fits this model?
So that's actually a really good question. And I think it depends on the purpose, and it depends on the kind of stakeholders we're looking at. So as you can see, there are opportunities for cooperatives in all different kinds of sectors. So for example, there could be opportunities for cooperatives where there's a need for a service in a community that's not getting served. That might be an opportunity for a cooperative. And Ellen will talk more about the opportunities for worker cooperatives and specifically where there are good fits for worker-owned cooperatives. So really, Teresa, I would say the answer to that question is like where a group can do something better as a group than they can individually, where there might be benefits to doing something as a group as opposed to doing something individually. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. As I mentioned, cooperatives are financed by their member owners because they are the owners. Voting happens in a one member, one vote system typically, or some other democratic structure. And cooperatives are governed by boards of directors, and sometimes they're managed by hired management. So to this question about why, like where are cooperatives a fit or why might businesses use a cooperative structure? So there are, so in some instances, you could think about that as an economic question, right? So in particular, agricultural economists look at this through the potential economic benefits to a cooperative and thinking specifically about where cooperatives might help correct some type of market failure. So for example, by pooling resources to access supplies and services that might not be accessible otherwise. That's the story, for example, of rural electric cooperatives in rural communities across the country. They could be for reaching new markets, for example, by aggregating volume. So for example, if farmers don't individually produce enough product that they can access certain types of markets, perhaps they can work together and to aggregate that product in a cooperative structure where they can access those markets, or at least access them in a more effective or efficient way. Cooperatives might be able to pool resources to reduce costs. For example, those purchasing cooperatives that I talked about, where they're coming together to purchase in larger quantities, and so reducing the unit cost of the supplies that they're purchasing. So there might be economic reasons for cooperation. There can also be, as that definition from the International Cooperative Alliance pointed out, there can be social and cultural reasons that people form cooperatives. So for example, sharing benefits with member owners, right? That democratic structure and that idea of sharing benefits across members. In particular, in cooperatives, that's done in proportion to their use of the business enterprise. Again, kind of different from other business models by disconnecting the return or sharing of benefits, like, for example, surplus or profits, in proportion to investment. In a cooperative, those returns or profits are shared in proportion to use. And then we can also see engaging members in a democratic structure could be a motivation for businesses using a cooperative structure. So wanting to utilize that democratic structure for social and cultural reasons as well. So hopefully that answers that question. And at this point, I would really love to take a deeper dive into the worker cooperative space with my colleague, Ellen, who is joining us now. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you can hear. Okay, and I can hear you. Fantastic.
Great.
Ellen is the and co-op organizing for Co-op Cincy. She has organized people from diverse backgrounds to improve their workplaces for more than a decade, and is actually a co-founder of Co-op Cincy and One Worker, One Vote, who are dedicated to developing a more sustainable business model of organizing, economic democracy, and wealth building with marginalized communities. And in her role, Ellen oversees new co-op organizing projects, the launch of Co-op Cincy's education arm, Co-op U, and makes sure that we have resources we need to be successful. So Ellen, thanks so much for joining us. And I would love to turn the conversation over to you to share a little bit more about worker cooperatives.
Definitely.
And then we'll have a conversation, I hope, that'll get us into the details a little more. So
Great.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you share yours.
Okay, awesome. And can you guys see me? Like, is my camera showing up okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Let's get a window. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for that warm welcome. And I'm really excited to be with you guys today. Get to talk about worker-owned co-ops. This is my passion. This is what I do. So I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. So Co-op Cincy, we're a nonprofit cooperative business incubator, been around for over 10 years. And we really work to create, to launch co-ops and to really kind of build this economy that works for all. So by providing these family sustaining jobs, by helping people start and or transition existing businesses to worker ownership. This is just kind of so you guys get a sense of our organization. So we have 12 co-ops currently in our network and growing. I think we should have 13 hopefully by next week. And a whole variety of sectors. So you guys can kind of see some of the logos there, but everything from food to construction to retail to just all childcare to cleaning. So we're in a lot of different sectors and growing. And this is just kind of a picture of the different services we provide. So everything from transitioning existing businesses to education, starting new co-ops, our loan fund, and support of startups. So I think that's what the next slides are. Yeah, so our strategies there, like I said, starting up new co-ops, transitioning existing businesses, and supporting our existing co-ops. So that is a little bit about what I do. And I wanted to share with you, and I'm hoping this is going to work well. Let me just see. But this is a video of one of our co-ops, just kind of get a sense of what it feels like to be in a worker-owned co-op on a daily basis. So let's hope that this will work. So give me 1 second. Can you guys hear that?
This is my first time working at a farm, and it's a cooperative farm where everybody works together. It's more unified, and I really appreciate it because it feels like I'm kind of at home here. I feel very comfortable, and we all work together extremely well as a team, and I feel like this is something I'm supposed to be doing rather than just going to work, and that makes me feel really good.
Well, all farms need a team, but to have a cooperative, you really feel a part of the ownership, because I've always worked on someone else's farms, and to work in a co-op is a chance to really have your voice heard and to make suggestions and to know that you are part of that farm and to own that farm. Having the decisions being made by other workers from the ground up means that there's no filter of information in a hierarchy being lost. It just makes a lot of sense for the actual workers to be making the decisions on the farm.
Hi, my name is Tia Coleman. I've been with Her Harvest for a little over a year. And to me, being part of a co-op makes sense because you matter. Your opinion matters, your values. You're not just another worker that's there to get the job done.
Out of all my jobs I ever had, this job here treated me the most fairly. Then they offered me a part of being an owner, of this company. So it was a no-brainer to stay here. Everybody that I've come in contact with through either co-op, especially our harvest, treat me, like family, and that's really important to me. So that's why I decided to stay here and stick it out with our harvest. Because they showed me love, so I'm showing them love, staying here working with them.
I would just say that it's a family, and that's what a worker owner business does. It creates families, not just workers, and supports actual families, and that's pretty much all I'll say. But then just one caveat is that our worker owners at the food hub, they actually work with their families, and I think that's just really beautiful. You don't have a lot of businesses that do that, so worker families and actual families.
Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a taste of that. I'm going to stop sharing now because I think we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. But yeah, I just want to give people a flavor of just kind of what is it like to actually work in a worker co-op.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellen, for sharing that and the story of Our Harvest, which is, I think probably one of the longer operating cooperatives, worker cooperatives that you've worked with in the Southwest Ohio region. But I was hoping that you could share some examples of other worker cooperatives in Ohio and kind of give us a sense of the worker cooperative landscape in Ohio. So what are worker co-ops doing? Where are they? How can people figure out more about them?
Yeah, so I think we're really lucky to live in a state that really has a pretty vibrant worker co-op movement. So we've been trying to keep track of them all and count them all. We now, have a statewide network, but our understanding is about maybe 24 different worker-owned businesses, in Ohio, and that ranges everywhere from, our 12 here in Cincinnati. And like I said, we are in a lot of different sectors, but, in addition to our farming co-op, we also have a catering co-op. We have a grocery store co-op that's working to get off the ground, a grocery delivery co-op. We have a co-op that does residential insulation called Sustainergy. We have a co-op of immigrants that they have come together to form a cleaning co-op doing residential cleaning. We have a childcare center that's recently transitioned to worker ownership and are doing that together. So we've got a whole bunch, here, but we also have, if you look up in Cleveland, the Evergreen Cooperative, some people might be familiar with, they have, I think, 5 co-ops, including in laundry. They have a greenhouse. They have a chain of coffee stores. They also have an insulation co-op, and I believe one that's getting into manufacturing. We also in Columbus, many people might know a Patty Cake Bakery as another example. They've been around for a long time, and there's a new group there that's really trying to form, additional co-ops. You may have already mentioned in Athens, but Casa Nueva, is an amazing restaurant that's owned by their workers. In Dayton, they have Gem City Market, which is a new grocery store co-op. So yeah, there's a lot of different ones throughout the state, and I would say, and really growing. We've got in our statewide network, we started with just 3 organizations, and now there's 10 different co-op developers across the state. So so exciting and growing.
Yeah, very exciting, and lots of diversity in the types of businesses that worker owners are coming together to do in the cooperative model. I just wanted to ask you if you could, worker cooperatives are one form of employee or worker ownership. Maybe just quickly tell us some of the other ways that employees own their business. Just to clarify for folks, worker co-ops is kind of one space we're talking about, and there are of course other methods to worker ownership.
Definitely. And I also want to come back to that question that was in the chat too. So I would say, as you can kind of see in all the different types of worker businesses that are just in Ohio, that that is not really a specific sector that necessarily, is the best, it's like, oh, that's the fit for a worker co-op. You should only do it in that sector. But it's a governance model. It's about how a business is run. So you see businesses in every single sector and every single size that can be, worker owned. We have some that are as small as 3 people to some that, if you look at especially the ones that are in Spain, I mean, they have over 40,000 people in one of their grocery store co-ops. So it really is more about how you govern and like who is benefiting, who are the members who are benefiting from that business. But yeah, when you go to kind of the actual structures of how can these businesses be worker owned, there's kind of multiple different ways. So, you have in Ohio, we actually have, our state laws allows people to actually incorporate it as a cooperative entity. So it's a cooperative business entity. I think 1429 is a section in the law for that. So it's an actual legal entity. But you can also have, LLCs and corporations can be organized as co-ops. They just have a cooperative operating agreement, essentially. You can also have ESOPs. So many people are aware of, employee stock operating plans. And those, don't necessarily have to operate in a democratic way, but you can structure them in a democratic way. So I think that one is probably very well known. But, oftentimes ESOPs really just continue to operate as a traditional business would. It's more of a retirement plan. But there's many kind of famous ESOPs out there. New Belgium Brewery was one of them, but that really truly kind of bring in an operating model that's about being democratic. So that's another way. And then another one that, kind of brings together kind of multiple models is something called a multi-stakeholder cooperative. And so that means that you have, you kind of take the co-op and you look at ownership and you have multiple parties that are involved. So you could have, the workers and the consumers, for example. And so one example of like a business that's very traditionally organized that way is a grocery store co-op. And so typically, it's where it's like, it really makes sense to really tie everyone's interests together in a way that, can help the business thrive. So, I would say, for example, with Gem City Market, my understanding is that they've got I think it's 65% owned by the workers and 35% owned by the consumers. And for them, it's really important because they want to make sure that people are really engaged in what is the products that we're putting in the store, keeping the store thriving in the community. There's a small dividend that goes back to those folks when the business does really well. But at the same time, recognizing that the livelihood of this business is really of the people there is really the workers. So still giving them that kind of majority stake. But there's lots of other examples too, where you can bring different groups together. We've had in some of the childcare work that we've done where we've had, both parents and caregivers, be owners. So those are, I think, all the different ways, at least that come to mind right now. I don't know if there's anything I'm missing, but those are the most traditional ways you see worker-owned co-ops formed.
I can't think of any that weren't in your list. So thank you so much for walking us through that. One of you've mentioned one of the most famous, I would say, examples of worker-owned cooperatives is the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation in the Basque region of Spain. I was just wondering if you could share a couple of highlights with us. Why is that a model that folks look to? Maybe just share with people how they can learn more about that, because there is so much fascinating information out there about Mondragon and what we can learn from that region.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question because this is one of my most favorite things to talk about. So yeah, I mean, I think, as kind of the founding of Co-op Cincy, the reason why so many of us founders got into this space is because we were very much involved, in our communities and in trying to work on the different injustices that were going on in our community and really trying to find a model that has really just, had some amazing success. And we came upon the Mondragon model. We had a study group. We actually had delegations that were going back in the 80s and 90s to visit Mondragon. And so Mondragon is in the Basque region of Spain, in the northeast region. They started after the Civil War with Franco, and this kind of region, they fought against the dictator. And as a result, they were cut off to all forms of aid and infrastructure. Their cities were bombed out. I mean, it was just a really, really desperate situation after the Civil War. And so their economy was in shambles. And so, they kind of had to kind of grapple with this and say, okay, either we have to come together and do something to be able to kind of revive our economy and make it so we can live here, or we're all going to have to leave, right? We're going to have to leave our homes, leave our community. And so what they did, and this was around, in the 1940s, 1950s, is they started to come together and try to rebuild that social fabric. And they started building, to start off, it was a school, a technical school where they were training the young people in skills, because they were very much of a manufacturing kind of area of the country. And as they were, training on skills, they also began to just train on like, how do we work together, right? To try and, solve a lot of these issues that we see in our community. And so the idea of worker-owned businesses, of cooperative businesses kind of came to life. And so they started their first cooperative business in 1956, making kerosene stoves with four worker owners. And from that, they just, kind of kept creating co-op business after co-op business in all different sectors based on the needs that they had in the community. So, they transformed that school, that technical school, into now a co-op university. They created their own bank, which is now one of the top 2 banks in the country, a cooperative bank. They have, over 100 different co-ops, majority of which are in manufacturing, that have now, going from those 4 or 5 worker owners to now over 80,000 people employed. They have, their own grocery store cooperative. So they've just, built co-op after co-op, business after business in this model. And what it's really been able to do, and what studies have shown, what, they've been studied all over the world, but they've really been able to create a much more, equitable society. And so if you kind of look, there's something called the Gini Index, which is measuring inequality, but they have one of the lowest levels in the world. And so when I was lucky enough to visit them several years ago now, I guess it was probably maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But, when you are in that area of Spain, you don't see, mansions in the hills, but you also don't see poor people on the streets. And they've really just been able to ride, kind of the waves of the ups and downs of the international economy and remain strong, because they've really created their own economic kind of ecosystem there. So Co-op Cincy is directly, inspired by and connected to the Mondragon model. Our co-op development boot camp is directly helped to be formed, working directly with their incubator there. And it really is that is a type of social change that we are inspired by, that we want to see in our region. And we want to see it all over the place, but where you can actually kind of, build an economy that's run by and for the people, and that there's true wealth building that's happening. And so they've been able to transform that region. And we believe that that's possible here and everywhere by utilizing kind of just a different structure in terms of how we organize our economy. So thanks for prompting me to talk about it.
Yeah, no problem. And I did just want to share with everybody, that there is a ton to learn there. And one of the things that our team has been doing for a couple of years is called the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative, which is a learning network to help just build awareness of cooperatives particularly in Central Appalachia. And as a part of that initiative, we had some folks talk in 2020 about really what Central Appalachia can learn from Mondragon and from worker co-op collaboratives. So I will share a link to a page where we have recordings of those educational sessions if you're interested in learning more and taking a look back at that webinar specifically. So Ellen, question in the chat, but also a question that I had on my list to ask you is kind of the more nuts and bolts. So tell us a little bit about how a business, we've talked about cooperatives can get started as a group of people coming together to solve a problem or to address a challenge by starting a new business, right? In the cooperative community, we call that a co-op startup. So that's a brand new business. And I'll talk a little bit about that process in a little bit. But one thing that we see more growing, I guess, in worker cooperatives is what we call conversions, where an existing business transitions its current ownership or governance model into a worker cooperative. So can you describe that process for us and tell us a little bit more about how worker co-op conversions work?
Most definitely. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again because we got a nice handy little chart that we can kind of show on this, or a little graphic. So that is one of the things that I work on. A good portion of my time these days is working with existing businesses that want to transition to worker ownership. We have a program called the Business Legacy Fund that walks owners through and groups of workers through, but also helps to finance these deals. And so essentially we kind of break it down into 5 different steps. And so I'll just kind of go through these, a little bit step by step. But so the first step is really exploring compatibility. So saying, okay, is this the right fit for this business? Is this something that really meets the goals of the owner? Does this, what's motivating them to want to transition this business over? And are there people within that business that are interested in becoming worker owners? Are they interested in taking over? So it's really to just try and make sure that we're all on the same page. And so, I'll talk on the next slide about like kind of what businesses typically are a good fit. But, it's really trying to make sure that, is this owner, do they care about their employees? Do they care about the legacy that they built in their community? Or are they really about just maximizing the amount of money they can get from selling their business? Typically, the ones that are about maximizing the amount of money isn't necessarily the best fit. Sometimes we do a fair market, valuation, fair market price. So this is not about charity, but it's also not necessarily like a strategic buyer where they would be, paying something that would be much more expensive, I guess, than you would typically see at like a fair market value. So, typically in this part, as we're doing kind of exploring compatibility, is we really try to start with the valuation of the business, because that can be such a, even if there's lots of value alignment, that can be such a make it or break it, unless whether or not we're on the same page or what the true market value is of the business. If that all kind of comes back and we say, okay, yeah, we're in the ballpark, this makes sense, then it's about really starting to dig in and assess feasibility. So we conduct a feasibility study. We look to see, kind of really looking at, again, saying, is this price that we're thinking, does it really make sense? Let's really dig into the financials and make sure that everything checks out. Operationally, who's going to be doing the work? How are we going to transition the knowledge that this owner has over to the folks who are going to be taking over? Is there a skills gap there? How is that going to be covered? Does anybody need to be brought in, or can it be done internally? And then also kind of, structurally, like what's the structure going to look like? Are we just converting that existing entity, changing how they're structured, or are we having a new entity buy that business, but just kind of what are all the pieces about how to make this work? So and once that looks good and everybody feels like they're on the same page, then it's about, really kind of crafting out that plan step by step, but kind of writing up that business plan, right? All those documents of making sure we got our bylaws, we've got, all of our kind of how we're going to work through this knowledge transfer, and whatnot. So, kind of putting that plan together of how do we engage and train and support, the workers as well. So once that's all done, everybody feels good about the plan. Then it's about finalizing that deal. So, it's securing the financing, making sure everybody's on the same page. We've got all those numbers correct, and the right lending partner. And then once that deal's been finalized and then actually everything's been signed and the transition has happened, then it's about, sometimes we say that the real work, right, of actually creating that culture of worker ownership. So supporting, that those workers, it's not just like even though you might be, your governance documents might say, like, now you're going to be more democratically run. It's not something that just happens overnight, right? You have to actually truly create a culture that's around engagement and that helping people understand their rights and responsibilities as worker owners. So that's more or less, I would say, the steps about how we go about it. I thought I did have a slide there. I guess I did not. So I guess I would say in terms of, what businesses, really make sense for something like this. Again, it's about making sure that there's alignment, in terms of the owner and the workers. We're looking typically for this strong businesses. So this is not typically a great fit for something that's more of like a rescue package, or a business that's not doing well. It's not that it's impossible, but, you're really, you want to set workers up to be successful. So if that company is not, if they're not making it, you don't want to have workers put investment into something that, is not, is not viable, right? So it's usually you want something that's strong, and some of those indicators can be, not too much debt, and you really want something that's going to be around for the long haul, right? You want something that's not going to go defunct, in 5 years because technology is changing or something like that. But other than that, I mean, it can pretty much be any type of business. It can pretty much be any size. I mean, we in Cincinnati really focused on kind of our small to medium sized businesses, especially because there just seems to be a real lack of opportunities for those folks to really sell to somebody. But it can be, like I said, it can be any size.
Fantastic. That's a really helpful overview. And I think transitions really well into thinking about, once there is a worker cooperative, can you tell us a little bit more about the process for workers becoming members, right? So once there's a worker cooperative, does that automatically mean, for example, that everybody who works in that business is an owner? Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah. So no, it does not mean that everybody automatically becomes a worker owner. So every co-op business, they will determine their bylaws and their processes. And so, typically as a part of that bylaw document, they decide, okay, what are the requirements for somebody to be a worker owner? And so, there's often a work requirement. So it might be like the amount of time that you're expected to work at the business before, ownership will be offered to you. Most of our co-ops pick 6 or 12 months, but they're, it could be up to 2 years, right? I mean, it really depends on each co-op. And then there's also a financial requirement. So, you are becoming an owner in a business. So, I think it's really important, for you to have some skin in the game, and current co-op owners want to make sure that you're serious about this, that this is something that you are going to value and that you're going to, put time and effort and resources into. But that is something that's determined by those co-op businesses. We have startups that have gone as low as $250 to, existing businesses that have been around for a while that are at $4,000. And you have tons of variation across the country of, things that are, tens of thousands of dollars too. So it really just depends on, kind of, I would say, how long that business has been around, how strong their financials are, and just what the goals are around, open admission, which is a co-op, principle and value that we all believe in. So trying to make sure that it's not prohibitive. And then, sometimes there's other requirements too. It can be around like you have to attend meetings or do co-op education. But yeah, and I would say that the existing co-op owners have to offer you, membership, offer you the ability to join. And then you also have to accept that as a worker owner. So it's up to each person. And we have, many co-ops where there's, there can definitely be a number of people who are not owners, who've decided that, I just want to be able to do my 9 to 5. I don't want to have to do anything other than that in terms of responsibilities. Or maybe they're only there for a little period of time. They know they're going to move on, or maybe they're part-time. So yeah, you can have both members and non-members within a co-op.
Yeah, and I think, Ellen, what's interesting about that you're kind of pointing out is that there's a lot of diversity, right? There's a lot of the group coming together to decide what's important to them in determining how people become members and what works in their specific instance. So one thing you just mentioned is that some workers, employees, if you would call them that, who haven't become worker owners might not be interested in the additional responsibility of becoming a worker owner. Could you tell us a little bit more about what are those additional responsibilities when somebody becomes a worker owner? Like, what does that mean in kind of like daily practice for them?
Yeah. So again, I would say, and also one of the reasons why I love worker co-ops is because there is so much flexibility. So it is definitely different within each worker-owned business. Like they have to decide, what responsibilities are, for all the workers, what responsibilities are for the management, what responsibilities are for the board, what are for the worker owners. But what I would say is like typically, these businesses, this is not kumbaya. This is not something that we're just every single decision, like, what toilet paper are we going to buy, is made by everybody, right? This is still, these have to be, really smart, successful functioning businesses. So there has to be division of labor. There has to be, the ability to delegate and have people, work on things and get things done efficiently. So I would say like typically what we see within the co-ops is that, from the worker owners, they elect a board of directors. directors. And then you have like all the worker owners together. We often call it the General Assembly, but it's kind of all the worker owners together. And people wear different hats. So, and within our co-ops, the board really is about that long-term strategic vision kind of plan. Like, are we staying true to our business plan? Are we staying true to our principles? Where are we trying to go as a business? And they are elected, right, from their peers, and they can also appoint outside people to be on those boards. In terms of, the managers, those are oftentimes appointed by the board. But, these are the folks who are looking after the day-to-day operations of the business of like, what do we need to do to enact those plans to make sure that we're on track, to make sure these things are getting done. And within most of our co-ops, we also have something called a labor committee or a union committee, because, at the same time, even though we're all worker owners and we're running this business together, there's still the importance around thinking about like, what is it like as a worker in this business? What are my wages? What are my working conditions? What are my benefits? And how do we work through conflict? As individuals, we're all human beings, so that's naturally going to arise. So it's a space to work through that. And then you also have the workers who are not, worker owners that are, a part of that. So, I would say people wear different hats. And the other thing I would say is in terms of, big decisions, like, are we going to go, buy a new building? Are we going to open up a new, product line? Are we going to take on, debt for something? Those decisions have to go out to the whole group, all the worker owners, and say, okay, if this is a big decision, this is impacting all of us, or, kind of what's going to happen with our ownership shares, then they would vote on something like that. So that's a general sense, but like you said, there's so much diversity within the businesses.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I do want to make sure we transition to talking a little bit more about what resources people can access to learn more about worker cooperatives and cooperatives generally. And then we leave plenty of time for questions from the audience. So I am going to transition back quickly to talk a little bit about the cooperative startup process. So Ellen talked about the process for conversion of a worker, an existing business to a worker-owned cooperative. And one of the other spaces, as I mentioned, that we see cooperatives coming together is the startup process. So this process looks a little bit more like a group of people, a group of stakeholders. Perhaps they are all workers in an existing business, or perhaps they're farmers who are working in a specific area or creating a similar product, for example, or maybe they're a group of business owners that have realized that they are purchasing really similar products as inputs for their business, for example. But there's some type of mutual need among the group where they have realized, aha, maybe we could do better at whatever this function is if we work together. So maybe that's a purchasing function or a marketing function or some type of service function, but there's this identification of a mutual need. That's really important because, sometimes we see groups, for example, that come together and are like, we're doing really similar stuff and it would be really smart to work together. And we want to do there's so many things we could do to work together to do better at this. It's important to actually specifically identify kind of those business functions, because as Ellen said, in the worker co-op space and in every other co-op space, these are, functioning businesses. These are businesses that have to be successful as businesses. So it's really important to kind of identify that function of the cooperative from a business perspective. And then to go into really deeply understanding that business function, right? And understanding if the marketplace is amenable to this business opportunity, if there's potential member use for this business opportunity, right? It's one thing to recognize a need. It's a different thing to understand if members would actually utilize a cooperative to serve that need. And the feasibility of an enterprise. So just like Ellen was talking about assessing the feasibility of operating in a worker-owned space, there's assessing the feasibility of operating a cooperative for whatever function it serves, whether that's to market or purchase or provide a service. And then, of course, the business planning, also the same thing, right? How is this cooperative going to function? How's the cooperative going to engage members? How's it going to finance itself? How's it going to manage risk? Who is going to carry out the day-to-day functions? How's it going to be governed? All of that is a part of crafting a really robust plan. And that plan, if you've done a lot of business planning or you've helped groups do business planning, you've probably heard or told groups that it is easier to work that stuff out on paper and trial and error on paper than in real life, right? And hopefully before there's a problem. So that business planning process is really important, even to the cooperative startup process. And then there's creating the governance structure. And usually that's part of that business planning process, right? But you have to think really specifically in a cooperative about that governance structure and training stakeholders to operate in that governance structure, right? Helping them understand what's different about that governance structure. And that can be directors. It can also be members. So, I shared a slide earlier of the different groups of people involved in cooperatives. They all have different roles and responsibilities. And so ensuring that everyone's familiar with their role in that governance structure can be really important. And then, of course, this last bullet is just, sometimes I find it amusing that it's here just as a bullet, right? It's just like, acquire capital and implement the business plan. No big deal. It's just the last bullet. But of course, as you all know, that's the biggest part, right? Is actually getting started, implementing that plan, and moving forward as a successful business. But so you can see that there are routes to cooperation that are, from startup or conversion, and frankly, they're quite similar. Interesting that is part of the cooperative process. So many of these are part of the cooperative process in both instances. So I do want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions that there are. So I want to make sure that we share resources. So I would just like to share that our team at the Center for Cooperatives at CFAES at Ohio State has a number of resources available. I mentioned the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative, where we have learning events, webinars. Generally, we've had community documentary screenings. We've had in-person workshops. Check out the website that I put in the chat to learn more about that and to see recordings of past events. And then this screen actually is sharing an online platform that our team put together a few years ago, all about the cooperative business model, with digital resources, links to articles, videos, infographics, all to help folks understand the different aspects of the cooperative business model. There are some fantastic kind of more traditional resources out there, publications and guides and books and scholarship. But we felt like there was a need for some easily accessible, digestible material. And so this platform is that. So you can visit that at go.osu.edu/coopmastery and check that out. And then, of course, you can get in touch with us. So our team does training and education and technical assistance around the cooperative model. That's my email there. And then there are ways to get to our website as well as our social media. So my email is scott.1220@osu.edu. And I'm happy to connect and answer questions. And I want to flip it over to Ellen to share resources available from Co-op Cincy, and then we'll talk a little bit about the statewide network of cooperative developers.
Yes. Here we go. It's like I'm trying to share again. So I had that up already, was the statewide network piece, but yeah, I mean, I would say in general for Co-op Cincy, we are, we do most of our work in kind of the Southwest Ohio region, but we also do consulting. So we'll work with folks that are outside that region as well. And I think, I guess I could go back to that slide, but, we offer, support on, all the different things that were listed there. So here we go. Oops. But yeah, so I mean, on transitions, that process of going from an existing business to worker ownership, on co-op education and culture building. So we have something we called our worker owner workbook, but an actual curriculum that you can use with worker owners and workers in businesses to help them build that co-op culture and business literacy. And then this year we'll be coming out with another guide that's around a facilitator guide for actually going through a co-op development program. So we do what we call Co-op U, which is our co-op boot camp, and we offer that, that 12-week program on both a local level, but also on a statewide and a national level at different times throughout the year. And then, we provide ongoing technical assistance, as well as, access to funds through our loan fund. Right now, our loan fund is really only deployed in Southwest Ohio, but I know through the statewide network, we're looking at different ways to try and deploy it more broadly. So kind of stay tuned, I would say, for that part. So I would say that is Co-op Cincy. And then I don't know if you want me to share the slide on the network.
Yeah, please. I think that'd be great.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about it, or do you want to talk about it?
You start, and then I can fill in and we can share.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So we're really excited about the OWN network. So the Ohio Worker Ownership Network. This started back in 2020. So right as that pandemic was taking place, started with 3 organizations, and now we have 10 different co-op developers across the state. This is kind of a map of where we all are. And so we're all throughout the state. We're always excited for more, folks to join us, but this is a real place for co-op developers. And I think also kind of co-op service providers. We have some lawyers who are connecting and accountants, but to really be able to, kind of share best practices, to support one another, to do joint training, and again, that kind of access to capital. So definitely, if you're interested in any of the above, please reach out. I think my last slide here is my contact information, but you can also reach out to Hannah, and she knows how to get a hold of me. But yeah, we wanted to make sure you guys have plenty of options in terms of resources to get these types of businesses started and supported.
Yeah, and I would just share as well. So I'll share a link in the chat to the kind of web home of the Worker Ownership Network that's hosted by the Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University. And that website actually includes a really great report called Building Legacies that does, it's an interesting look at opportunities for worker ownership, and specifically thinking about the potential benefits for worker ownership in this context of cooperative conversion. So thinking about the transition of existing businesses, particularly business owners who may be ready to retire and don't have a transition plan for their business, and what that what the landscape across Ohio is. So I will share that in the chat, and then I will open it up to questions, and just also share here that we are always open to feedback and understanding the reach and impact of our program. So if you would like to share feedback for us and information, that is voluntary, but we do really appreciate it. You can visit the link there that's on the screen, or scan that QR code with your smart device. Hopefully that makes it easier, but only if the smart devices are working smartly. So please feel free to ask questions, and I will put the OWN network in the chat.
We don't currently have any questions in the chat, but you just touched on one of my questions. Is this something that business owners might consider as an exit strategy out of their business, that are maybe nearing retirement, but they don't have family that they're planning to pass it on? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can start, and then Ellen, feel free to jump in. So yes, the worker ownership model specifically is a model that we're seeing more use of it as a transition strategy for business owners who are looking for a transition. And so we know, excuse me, we know that the statistics on business ownership transition are that essentially the baby boomer generation, right, is at or nearing retirement age, and they represent a significant number of businesses in Ohio and across the country. And unfortunately, the statistics on small business transitions are that sales of businesses to new owners are not the most common in small business, right? So looking at how those businesses can transition so that they remain in their community, that they remain workplaces in their community, they remain drivers of economic activity in their community, but without necessarily having a built-in transition plan, perhaps to the next generation or to a third-party purchaser. So yeah, the worker ownership model is something that is where that's happening more these days. And I will let Ellen talk more about that with direct experience in that space.
Yeah, so I definitely, like I said, recommend the report that Hannah's talking about because that looks specifically on Ohio. But I think there's over 92,000 businesses in the state of Ohio that are owned by baby boomers right now that are at risk, for going under. And studies have shown that about 80% of small businesses do not have succession plans. And so, the chances of them, not continuing on if they don't have a plan in place are pretty high. So, I think we view this as a really great opportunity for, owners of existing businesses, especially, if they don't have that clear who's going to buy this business next. And if they really, do want to keep that business, in the community, care for the people who've really helped them build that business. Because you never know with a lot of outside buyers, like they might decide to liquidate, they might decide to wrap it up into something else and get rid of jobs and different things. So this is a real way that, you can continue that legacy on and still get a fair market value for your business. So we see this as a really great, way to, for business owners to preserve their legacy, especially, when there's certain levels that are, there's private equity that's really interested. But yeah, if you don't have that son or daughter and you don't have, that clear, person who's going to want to buy, I mean, it's really, an option to look inward and say, okay, wait, well, who here might be interested? And I know sometimes that can feel daunting. And so like Hannah and myself are definitely happy to help coach people through that and just help them think through it. But, we feel like this is such an important thing for our community so we don't lose these jobs. I mean, 2/3 of all of our small businesses are, owned by these baby boomers. So we want to make sure that, our local economies remain strong and these jobs remain in our communities.
And I think something that's interesting there, I know that part of this conference itself is organized around thinking about different areas of the state, right? And thinking about Appalachia specifically and Southeast Ohio. So, that is this transition and retirement wave is a concern all across all different types of communities. So we know, so the report does a really great job. Our colleague at Kent State did a really great job of breaking out some of those statistics regionally. So you can actually take a look there. But we know, for example, in Southeast Ohio, there's about 8,000 firms that are owned by baby boomers. And that represents about 135,000 employees, which is a significant number when we start thinking about the impact in the region. So yeah, take a look at that report and feel free to reach out with questions.
Yeah, it sounds like next year we might have to have a session on succession planning and
Yeah.
include co-ops as part of that, because we hear that all the time. Yeah, that business owners, they don't have anything in place and they're not really sure where that next step will be. So that's really interesting. And those stats were really interesting as well. I didn't realize how many of our businesses are owned by those that are ready to retire. So
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all of that.
Well, also stay tuned and check out the ways to connect with Co-op Cincy and with our center, because that's actually some education that we've been kind of brainstorming. Actually, Ellen and I and some others have been brainstorming education on kind of how cooperatives might be a part of succession strategies for small businesses. So, get in touch with us if that's something that you would like, or maybe if you are working as a business developer or an economic developer in your community and want to have that conversation in your community, please feel free to get in touch with us about how we can bring some education like that to your community.
Awesome. Well, we do have a few minutes left. I don't know if you want to plug any upcoming workshops or things that you guys have going on.
Ellen, you want to go? Anything?
Sure. Yeah, so I would just say in general, every other year we do a big event. It's called our Union Co-op Symposium. We have people come in from all over the country and around the world, and especially folks from Mondragon. So unfortunately, you guys just missed the last one that was in November. But I just want to put that on people's radar that we do this. Like if you want to really get connected, especially to those co-ops in Spain and whatnot. To just, get on our mailing list because we put things out all the time. I mean, we're having an event on March 1st for folks who are kind of in this area. That's going to be a little bit of like a co-op 101, but it's also going to be about a new grocery related co-op that's trying to launch called Queen Mother's Market in the Cincinnati area. So if you're going to be in town in that area, you could connect with me and I would get you, we'd love to have you come to that event because I think it's going to be real fun. We're also doing tours each month right now that people can sign up for, and we're looking at doing a kind of end of the year kind of an education series that's open for folks. So I'll put a link, if I can figure out how to get it in the chat, I'll put a link in the chat for a little survey that people could fill out where you could sign up for some of these events that we have going forward.
Fantastic. And I will just share that, so I mentioned our Appalachia Cooperates Initiative, which is a peer learning network and an education network for folks in the Appalachian region, but of course all over if you want to learn about cooperatives. We host events for that, learning sessions for that quarterly. So if you want to learn more about that and get information about those events, you can actually get in touch with us and or sign up for our email list by visiting go.osu.edu/Appalachia Cooperates. And I'll put the link for that in the chat again, where I shared some recordings for that. So that's how you can get information about what those events are going to be and how you can access them. And then we're also out and about in the community doing presentation and education as a part of other events. So if you're interested in having a conversation about cooperatives as a part of an event on community development, economic development, or even specific industries, feel free to get in touch with us. And or if you see us out and about, say hello.
Yeah, and I'll just do one more plug for the statewide network. If there's any folks out there who are kind of in a development state and want to get connected to other co-op developers, or maybe just interested in exploring it, definitely reach out because we get together on a quarterly basis, and do skill building and just connecting and just talking through, the challenges and the successes. So we'd love to have more folks join.
Great. Well, I definitely want to say thank you to both you, Hannah, and you, Ellen. This was so informational. I started this session. I had mentioned to Hannah I wasn't initially moderating this session, and I wasn't super familiar with the topic, but I have learned so much. I honestly had no idea how many co-ops were out there. When you started naming the national grocery store brands and all of that, I was kind of like, wow, like, you can be, I thought co-ops, small, tiny, never imagined that it would, I'm buying these brands in Kroger. So I really want to say thank you for the information. Every time I had a question, you answered it as soon as it popped in my head. So very thorough, and it's much appreciated. And we thank you for your time and attending the conference. And then for those that are listening in, please tune in to our closing speaker, who will be on the main stage here in about 3 minutes. And we hope that you enjoyed the conference. I really enjoyed the 3 days that we put together, and we look forward to having this again next year, possibly in person, but who knows? Virtual seems to be going really well, and we've been able to broaden our horizons with speakers. So more to come on that. But thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.